At Stimunity, we have Randi Williams. She's currently a graduate research assistant in the personal robotics group, where she studies human-robot interaction and pre-K to 12 education, with a focus on students from diverse backgrounds. Her research aims to create sustaining bridges between communities and technologies to drive innovation. She's affiliated with MIT's RAISE Initiative and founding director of the Boston chapter of Black in robotics. She has a master's in in media arts and sciences from MIT in 2018 and a bachelor's of science in computer engineering from University of Maryland, Baltimore County in 2016. Randi strives to prepare the next generation of ethical engineers to use AI to solve pressing issues in her community, in their communities. Her projects on social robot learning companions, PopBots, and grade school AI ethics curricula, How to Train Your Robot, have received coverage from outlets such as The Atlantic, Wired, and the MIT Tech Review. She's received numerous awards, including the Microsoft Research PhD Fellowship, Cambridge Curious Scientist of the Year Award, LEGO Papert Fellowship, and the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship. Thank you so much for joining us today. Could you please start by expanding on your educational and professional journey that's led you to where you are right now?
Great. Thanks so much for having me. Truly a pleasure. And to start with, it's funny, I need to update my bio. I officially have my PhD as of like this month.
Okay, Dr. Williams,
So
I'll
Dr. Williams,
yeah,
so please just call me Randy.
congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, so it's super exciting to have that milestone checked off. So now we can add to the list PhD Media Lab 2024. And I guess, what else I would say about my educational journey is it started when I was 18. So I luckily grew up with two parents who were into engineering and computers. So me and my sisters, we all were interested in that for a long time. And that's why I studied computer engineering because I was like, I don't know what these things are, but I'll put them together. It sounds great. And my parents were very encouraging. And when I was 18, I met the then president of my undergrad. His name was Dr. Freeman Rabowski, and he's all about having more people who are underrepresented pursue STEM PhDs. So when I was 18, he said, well, he was talking to a room full of freshmen, like brand new to college, and he was saying, all of you have the ability, the capacity to be leaders in STEM fields. You can go, you can get a PhD, and you can change the world. And I was like, well, that sounds cool, but what's a PhD? And he was like, well, it means that, you can be a professor. It means that you start creating knowledge at the top of your field, but most importantly, they'll pay you to go and get it, so you don't have to pay for school. And I was like, sign me up. So really, where I am at this point is the culmination of this long journey of pursuing a PhD, pursuing this career in STEM, and also, I guess, just paying homage to how I was raised, which is, yes, what you do matters, but make sure that you're giving back to people as well. No, my parents gave me that. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So you have a pretty specific field that you're interested in, which is more on ethical AI, if I'm right, and sort of the interaction between students and AI, and like human robot interactions. Could you expand more upon that?
Of course. So I mentioned that I started studying computer engineering because I really liked building things. And when you do computer engineering versus computer science, you get to build a lot of things like physically. So hardware. So it's in the same space as you. And I thought that was really exciting. So when I was looking at graduate school, I was like, well, how can I still do this physical work, not just software? And how can I also do it in a way where I get to think about people a lot? So the program that I ended up in, it's called the Media Lab. And when I first heard of it, I was like, what are they doing? Like making movies? Like that has nothing to do with me. But actually what they do is they combine lots of different disciplines. So there are psychology researchers, there are artists like Pixar, Disney level artists, there are engineers, there are biologists, and we all come together and look at some of the largest problems in the world and think about how we can solve them. So very much a space where if you're interested in AI and technology, but you care a lot about people, you'll find a home there. So what happened as I was in like starting off was I was doing projects with education with very young kids. And we had this robot. Its name is Tega. It's very cute, very fluffy. I might send you a picture later if you want to add it to the video. But Tega was helping kids practice their literacy skills. So learning to read, learning vocabulary words. And these 5-year-olds, they would say, "Oh, I have something like this at home. I have an Alexa." I was like, "Oh, that is nothing like this, but I'm so fascinated that you have that at home and you want to tell me about it." So they'd explain how like Alexa was their buddy and they talk all the time. And like they would tell me how it worked. And I was like, "Oh wow, it's really interesting to me that you're 5 and you have this technology that talks with you. So, you don't need to learn how to read, write, type to search the internet. You just talk to your Alexa and there you go." So I got really curious about that. I got curious about what it means to grow up in a world where you can search the internet with your voice as a 5-year-old. And then I got curious about, well, if I made it possible or it were possible for you to build this, what would you build? And if you had the chance to learn about this, what would be the most important things for you to learn about? And that led me to this whole long journey with teaching kids about AI and also studying what do they think when they interact with these devices? What do they want to make? How does that change when you go to different places in the world? Lots and lots of different questions, but I think that kind of gives you a sense of how I progressed from technology to okay, but wait, also people, and then also like wait, education, like we have to teach people about it. And it was such a good time to do it because AI is such a big part of our lives right now. I know you all are doing so much work with AI around Cambridge and in the community. So yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for sharing that. So it definitely seemed like you started off more on the computer science side, the engineering side that was sort of influenced by your upbringing. And once you came to the MIT Media Lab, you saw that interdisciplinary work within AI and were interested in sort of building off of that and looking specifically into like education of AI. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Could you like name some of the highlights about the work that you've done, whether it's like an impactful moment or a project that you felt like significantly like contributed to your field, or just something
Mm.
that you purely enjoyed about the work that you do?
Great question. So as a trained scientist, I will give the numbers that are exciting and impactful, and then I'll tell you the thing that excites me the most. But from the work that I've been able to do, we've launched initiatives. Like one of them is called Day of AI. It's international. Last year in 2023, more than 3,000 classrooms in more than 90 countries signed up to basically have teachers learn about AI and then share it with their students. Incredible. Like the fact that like something that I worked on could reach so many people like all over the world blows my mind. Um, and then on top of that, there's like another platform. It's called the Raise AI Playground. If you've heard of the block-based programming language Scratch, which is very good for beginners, we essentially made it possible for people to program their own AI projects using Scratch blocks. So that's also like online and free. And I personally have had around 100 students use it. So I'll run studies and students will get a chance to learn about AI and make projects with that. And then other people have taken it and gone. So now it has like thousands of users, which again blows my mind. Like something that I can build can touch so many lives. That's really exciting. But I think my favorite thing is definitely seeing what students make with technology. And that's because like as someone who has worked in a few tech companies and has been around the space, the ideas are just so different and so beautiful. Um, One that comes to mind is the student wanted to make a sign language tool. So they had a sibling who was deaf and used sign language. They used sign language in the house, and they were saying, well, what's interesting is like smart speakers like Alexa, they don't understand sign language. Like a language is missing. Very good point. So they were like, how can I use my camera to have it recognize sign language so we can communicate with it in this way? And of course, that's a very tricky thing to do because sign language is such a dynamic language, but I thought it was a very good idea. Now, at the same time, the student was learning about algorithmic bias and specifically how, based on your skin tone, some machine learning systems, especially pre 2018 and pre Dr. Joy Buolamwini's work, gender shades, they weren't trained to account for darker skin tones. They didn't work as well for women as men. And if you think about it, a lot of them also weren't trained to work on kids. So like if you have smaller hands or a smaller face or your voice is younger, then they just don't work as well because no one was thinking about that. So the student learned about that. And as they're making their tool, they were thinking really carefully about, what that meant for their work. So at one point, a bunch of adults come into their classroom to see what they're learning. And, these are adults like different skin tones. And of course, they have bigger hands. And she got so excited. She was like, oh my gosh, all of you guys have to come here and train my like machine learning system because like I don't have hands that are the size of yours. So yeah, for me, it's like, A, how impactful that work was, the fact that it connected directly to her life and her experience, and that she just truly took the algorithmic bias lesson to heart. Like that's the future that I want. So I don't know. I don't know what the students doing now, but I hope they're sort of like continuing with some of the things they learned. Yeah.
That's that's so beautiful and impactful. It really is. So you mentioned like algorithmic bias, and I was wondering when you're crafting these curricula to teach AI, and sort of that conversation, it's moving really fast in our society. We see it very accessible to all students, and I don't think ethical AI or ethical usage of this technology is taught alongside. Or actually, there aren't really a lot of curricula out there to teach students how to use AI at all. So, what did that sort of discussion look like, and how did you like incorporate that into the curriculas that you worked on?
Yeah, and it's not taught a lot. I wish it were taught more. So part of the problem is, as you said, computer science education in general is just not as accessible as it should be. Sure, it's more accessible than it used to be, but still very small percentage of people are actually participating in those classes. Like they actually feel welcome in them. So that's one problem, both that I think about in my work with education, but that just exists in the broader field. Like we are building technologies to solve all these problems, but very few people actually get to work on them. And then on top of that, the education right now just doesn't do a great job of helping engineers think about the societal impact of their work. So there's this word that we use where we say that like all technology is inherently social or political, but socio-technical, right? So the two always go together. And I can think of, when I was undergrad taking my computer engineering classes, we had this ethics class, but it was about like the Challenger space shuttle explosion. It was about like professional ethics. It wasn't about how the vending machine that we were building in our class, like, in our like hardware class, how we might design it to make it more accessible. So the two ideas were really, really disconnected. So in my work, following the lead of some researchers like Dr. Casey Fiesler and Dr. Blakely Payne, is embedding technical and ethical lessons together. So that just means if I'm teaching a student how to build an image recognizer that can recognize your sign language, then you should also learn about algorithmic bias, and you should also learn that there's a particular way that you can train your model so that it doesn't, perpetuate that bias.
Right. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I guess moving more into what STEMunity is about, which is bringing in representation of women in STEM. I guess what are your thoughts about representation in women in STEM? Do you believe diversity and inclusion impacts like innovation in STEAM fields? And have you seen that in any way through your work?
I mean, of course, diversity impacts innovation. So a few things that I really love about my academic journey is that I've had such powerful role models of, all genders and all races. But they all believed that representation really mattered. So they were very particular about encouraging me and having me bring my full self to the table when I was doing work. So my advisor for my PhD, her name's Dr. Cynthia Brazil. She started this field called social robotics. And this is also a great story. So she was working in a robotics lab during her PhD, in particular looking at robots that were used to support people who are aging in Japan and like, helping them have more independence. And so the robots that like pick them up from the bed or help them wash their clothes. But her being in that room, sort of looking at what those robots were doing, she noticed that, yes, these people needed more independence and needed robots that could do tasks for them. but they were also lonely. And like, can we build robots that are more aware of our humanity that help us flourish holistically, not just like solving like physical problems for us, but like actually making us feel more human? And here we are. So, having an advisor, well, her journey in particular, I think, is a great example of why representation matters because her being in that room meant that she could see something that other people weren't seeing. And then as she's starting this group and running it, I think we're, one of the very few robotics labs in the world that's more than half women. And so like we work function very differently than like most robotics labs, but our work is very thoughtful and it's very full. And I hope the guys in our lab don't feel too, upset by the dynamic. But my guess is that that we all benefit by having like sort of this like at least gender parity in the room. But on top of that, there's quite a few international students, folks from all over the world who are born in different places, which means when we come to a problem, yes, we have all of our different ways of seeing the world, which you could call, biases in a good way. But by learning to work together as a team to solve them, the solutions become richer, they become more meaningful, more sustaining, so like they'll last for a lot longer. And that's what I've seen in our work for sure. That's why Day of AI is reaching so many people, I think, because we really have like this very rich team working on it.
Yeah, that's really impactful. And I guess taking it a step further, do you think there are ways that institutions and organizations can take a step forward to create more like inclusive environments to encourage diversity in STEM?
Yeah, I actually have like many practical thoughts about this because one day I want to be a professor. And so a question I ask is, well, how can I support my students and who they are to be successful? Like, how was I supported? How can I pass that on? And I think a lot of people think it's as simple as like, well, hire them. But even that's tricky because they're like, but where are they? We can't find any women who want to do STEM. But they're here. So yes, hiring them, but also, encouraging them, recognizing that like I didn't know what a PhD was when I was 18. And a lot of people who are in PhD programs with me have like parents who are all professors. And so it made a lot of sense to them, but it's very new to me.
Yes.
So how do you help someone like get that background if they don't have it? Can you surround them with a group? So don't hire one person, hire three, and then make sure that they all like each other and that they can lean on each other when things get rough, if they start feeling isolated. So community building is huge. We saw in 2020 that like activism really, really matters because the problems that we're dealing with in the world are just mind-bogglingly huge. And a lot of times those who are most vulnerable are hurt worst when something goes wrong. So listening to their voices, elevating them, making sure that they feel like safe to do it, but also like taking people seriously and making change when someone says, hey, this isn't working right. That really matters. I guess it's like leadership building. So yeah, I think there is like a lot of like very hard skill, not hard skill, but like, core things that we can do, not to just bring people into the room, but to make sure that they're thriving. And there's a part of me that's wondering, like, for you, is there like something within that that sort of has been helpful as I think of you as a leader as well? Yeah.
Are you asking me what do you think, like what my thoughts are in terms of how we can create more inclusive and diverse spaces?
Yeah, and I guess more specifically, personally, what's been helpful for you?
Personally. So I love that you touched upon two parts, which was like not only bringing in these perspectives, but making sure that they're supported. I think we fail to realize that even once we're in these institutional settings, that you still have these implicit biases that might happen, and like whether that's through microaggressions or it's just like maybe you don't feel like your work is being recognized as well as someone else's. I really think that it's it's about like keeping inclusion as not an afterthought, but like as something that's there and inherently a part of like the environment that you're creating. And so I'm very grateful to grow up in a very diverse space and have a lot of these perspectives in mind. Um, Especially through my work at Innovators for Purpose. So that's really nice. I think where I see this disparity is in like STEM classes that I've taken. Just last year in my APCS class, there were only two girls. And I think that really shows you that even in such a progressive city like Cambridge, there needs to be work done to uplift women and sort of get rid of what we call like the leaky pipeline for women in STEM. And yeah, what I've seen helpful, like you said, is human connection and like mentorship and visibility, which is sort of what I'm trying to bring out through this platform. So, yeah, thank you.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, that's so awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And what you said about your APCS class, yeah, there are also two women in my class. And it's like, are things getting better? Like, come on, guys.
Right. I guess sort of jumping off of that, could you describe any challenges that you may have faced as a woman in STEM and maybe how you overcame them and what you think that people can do in terms of supporting women in STEM?
Yeah. I mean, I hate talking about this part. I'm like, everything's great, you can do it. But yeah, there are definitely some challenges. I think one that sort of first comes to mind is this like insidious, always there feeling that you don't quite belong and that, like maybe everyone knows that you don't belong and they're trying to get rid of you. Um, and sometimes people talk about it and they'll call it imposter syndrome, but I think for me it was a little different because because of my parents, I knew that I was capable of the work, but I didn't know like whether everyone liked me, if that makes sense. So it was less of like a am I capable and more of a like am I safe here? Like
Mm,
am I welcome here? Are my ideas like okay to share here or are people gonna yell at me if I say something that they don't like? And if they yell at me, then I'm gone. I don't want to deal with that. Um, so that's a big challenge. And what has been super helpful, well, one, and I can think of so many people who would laugh if they heard me say this, is like just paying attention to like your own mental health. That's not something that I thought about like growing up and all throughout my career because again, engineer, but it's so important. And you'd be surprised how much your like individual cognition and your emotions can impact work that you're doing, even if it's technical.
mm,
Let all the scientists hear that. And so what's been really helpful is I'm actually a part of a support group for Black graduate women at MIT who are also doing PhDs, which means that they know exactly what it feels like. Like, they get the weird looks sometimes. They get like, if they don't do like perfect on the test, then they feel like, oh, am I just like failing everyone who will come behind me? And we can talk openly about those things. We can encourage one another. One of the funniest things is like when you're in the crisis mode and you're like, oh, I just like I said something weird at my like presentation and then someone asked a question I couldn't answer it like it was bad. Um, you forget just like all of your like resilience and all of your like capabilities in that moment. And so it's so helpful to have like other people saying, yeah, no, that I get that that's super jarring, but you know that you're like amazing, right? Like you know that you can like go back and like tell them and they'll like love you for it and then you try it and you're like oh yeah they were totally fine like it was in my head. So yeah, having a really excellent support group,
yeah. So
can't beat it.
So you are a part of this support network, and I know you've mentioned like throughout this interview that mentorship and especially
Yeah,
your parents have played a huge role in supporting you throughout your career. Could you just elaborate on like how you think those like mentorships and support networks have like helped you throughout your career and stuff? Yeah, just like
yeah, I think
yeah.
because what.
Just in terms of yeah, like the support, because I know you've already mentioned the different support systems that you've had, and if you'd like to elaborate more on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so this may be cheesy, but there's like a Michelle Obama quote that I really like, where she talks about like everyone needs, three kinds of people. People who are ahead of you, who are like paving the way. And so my parents, my advisor, Dr. Rabowski, uh, even like older like women who are in STEM, who are in the roles that I one day want to see myself in, like, those are the people who are just clearing the path, showing you that you can do it. And their impact is where I am now. Like I never imagined that I would be here in this position doing this kind of work. But I could see it and I could believe that it was possible because of them. And then the second friend you need are people alongside you who are like, trekking the path with you. So that support group that I mentioned of graduate women. I also play a lot of sports. So I'm thinking about like my rugby team in college. And sure, very different skill set, but I can't tell you how many times like you finish a really hard engineering test and then you go to rugby practice and you tackle something and you're like, yes, this is great. And I mentioned my sisters and also my lab mates. Like you have to have people who are in it with you, who are going for it with you. And then the third friend you have to have are people who are behind you, who you pull up. So like help along the way. And yes, I'm an education person, but I truly value and think it's important for everyone to participate in some sort of giving back. So if it's students who are younger than you, like maybe they're also in your school and you're like tutoring them, if you have younger siblings, if you're doing like volunteer work, I think there's so many ways to give back and really get perspective on like what matters in the world when you have when you take advantage of opportunities like that. And yes, it's like another thing, but it's such an important thing. It's so important to just like having a strong community that can keep going. Yeah, that's how I would sort of summarize it.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I really think that visibility and mentorship is a big part. And having the right support system and people to encourage you makes a huge difference in the way you carry yourself and sort of your motivation and like inspiration to get through like what you're doing. How do you think like telling stories and storytelling in general or sharing personal experiences can benefit and inspire future generations?
Oh man, I am in love with stories. And I actually he's passed away now, but one of my earlier AI professors, Dr. Patrick Winston, he believed that the thing that made, so from an AI perspective, the thing that makes humans unique from other animals or other cognitive beings like amoeba, I guess, is that we tell stories. And that these stories are our source of memory, they're our source of like passing knowledge, so books. They're a source of figuring out problems. So the way that we might use metaphor or allegory, like characters that are animals when they're really meant to represent like virtues, that is like the most powerful part of our cognition. And so like the theory being if you could get a computer to tell stories and to like have story understanding, then boom, like AGI. Or, sorry, that's like general intelligence. Like you finally can build something that replicates human intelligence. And I haven't built an AGI yet based on that idea, but I do see his point. I think, the story that I have, I tell back to myself. I share with other people like I'm doing right now. I love hearing other people's stories. I think I learned so much by being able to see something a different way. It's like uh, the closest you can get to walking in someone else's shoes by seeing their life through how they're telling the story of themselves. Um, and it could be powerful, I think is the biggest thing because your story doesn't have to tell the truth the way that like a textbook might, um, like facts and figures truth, but it can tell like a more broader and encompassing truth. Um, that is getting a little abstract, I guess. But what I'm thinking about is with the work that I do with AI and teaching kids, uh, we talk about ethics and we talk about like what could happen if, and I sort of say like give me the Disney ending and then give me the Black Mirror ending. And so even if people are just getting used to the technical ideas and stuff like that, they can fully go down the rabbit holes of like this is the happy ever after version and this is the everything goes terribly wrong and blows up in our face version. So I see it as a helpful tool for like that sort of like going beyond your own I guess like limit kind of thing.
Yeah, so basically, sorry, just to summarize what you've said is that storytelling can be very impactful in terms of not only like communicating a message, but also on more of a technical side that if AI has the capabilities and the cognition to understand storytelling and stories in general, like we're all done, right?
Nerdiest explanation ever, but yeah, that's
Okay.
exactly.
I guess sort of going back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of your STEM career and getting to where you are now, if you had the option to like give your younger self some advice, what would that be and why?
Oh man, advice. Um, I can think of all kinds of bad advice. Like, uh, yeah, okay. So bad advice would be let yourself be more than one thing. Even if you have to convince people at certain moments that you're like just really, really good and passionate about one thing, let yourself be more than one thing. And I'm thinking about when I was in high school, I did a lot of piano competitions. So I learned piano very young and did a lot of competitions. And then I decided that I really wanted to take a bunch of AP classes. And I thought I can't have both. I must either be the classical pianist or the AP science STEM person, but not both because that would be impossible. And I think it's only now as I'm getting older that I realize that, there's space for all of us.
Right.
Um, One phrase that I really like is we all contain multitudes. And I think giving yourself freedom to pursue all of your different passions really matters. So if you are a parent and you hear me say that and you don't want your kids to hear that, then I'm so sorry. But if you're like, I mean, honestly, any age, if you're looking for permission to go after that crazy idea, but you're like, oh, I have to take too much time, I'll never be able to do it, I think you should do it. Life is longer than you think. It can always surprise you.
What is some sort of jumping off of that, and sort of to our viewers who are watching this and any young girls who are like aspiring to go into STEM, what is some good guidance and advice that you would offer them?
Yeah, I would say take yourself super seriously. If you think it would be a good idea to start a company and you are 14 and you don't know anything about starting a company, well, there's YouTube and you start telling people around you that you have that dream, and go for it. Actually, it's one thing I really admire about IFP. Like, I wish I had something like that in high school, because the work that you're doing, like, I know that you're a storyteller, and also during this video series, and you've done so many other things. Like, I think I saw some code you pushed to GitHub recently. I was like, what? Um, it's okay to try that, and you'd be surprised when you get older and people are like, "Oh, but what have you done?" And you're like, "Oh, well, I kind of played around with this like book that I wrote," and people are like, "Whoa!" And you're like, "Oh." Yeah. So feel free to take anything that you're interested in seriously. Build that company. You're never too young. You're never like uh too naive. Uh, yeah, just try
Thank you so much for that advice, and thank you so, so much for being here. It was an honor talking
it.
to you, Dr. Williams. Again,
Yes.
congratulations. Thank you so much for the anecdotes and sharing your personal stories. It really means a lot.
Yeah. No, thank you. So honored that you invited me to share.